Hey everyone, welcome back to Rachel's Studio, where you learn not just the how but the why of watercolor so you move along your painting journey a lot faster, so be sure to subscribe. But in today's video, I want to talk about a lot of advice that I'm hearing from pros, and I take extra time to read books and really watch a lot of videos by artists that I admire. Right now I'm reading Charles Reed's book about painting flowers, and even though it's about painting flowers, I'm learning so much that I can apply to my painting. But even some of the advice that he put in that book, if I would have followed it, I would have not gotten this bunny painting to the place that I got it. And so today I want to talk about some common misconceptions that I often hear, even from the mouths of pros, that doesn't always ring true and doesn't always work. And sometimes it is true, sometimes it's not. Rules were made to break. Rules are good, but they were also made to break. So here are some common misconceptions. I've got 6. I'm even going to include one that I recently read about in Charles Reed's book, and then how I broke that rule in this painting and how it saved this painting. So let's go ahead and get started. All right, so misconception number 1. If you know all the fancy techniques, your art will look good. This is the only one that I have not heard a professional say, but it's what my the watch views on my videos tell me. My videos that are about advanced techniques are the most popular videos on my channel. And the videos that I think are more important to moving your art forward are often the least watched videos, the videos more about design and basic design tenets, that if you follow those, then no matter what technique you use, you're going to have a beautiful painting. So a perfect example of that is my video that I made about the Rembrandt windmill principle that was coined by James Gurney, and I learned about it through Tom Shepard, which Tom Shepard has an amazing YouTube channel as well. James Gurney says that his windmill Rembrandt principle was something that he realized when he was looking at Rembrandt's painting of the mill up on a hill. And he noticed that there were 4 different pairings of light and dark as you moved through the blades of the windmill. There was dark blade on light background, light blade on dark background, light blade on light background, and dark blade on dark background. And this helped the windmill not look like a cutout. Now that is not a technique. That's more about how to design your painting. But you can use a wet and wet approach. You can use dry brush. You can use whatever fancy technique that you want. But as long as you adhere to the windmill principle in your work, it's going to make your painting look more painterly, more dreamy, more professional, and it's going to make the disparate elements within your painting look like they're not cutouts and look more ingrained in your painting and just look more aesthetically pleasing. Try not to focus so much on the fancy techniques if you don't have a good foundation, understanding design and how to make colors vibrate together, for example, which I did a whole video on how to make colors vibrate and how to make your colors really pop. Those to me are much more important to understand than any one advanced technique or way of applying paint to your paper. All right, next misconception. I hear this a lot from really good artists that I really admire, and I get what they're saying, so I will address that. But first, the misconception is you must hone your drawing skills before you can paint. So this is my thing. I just want to paint. When I was a teenager, I loved to draw and I did a lot of drawing. But then I kind of segued into painting because I just wanted a new challenge. But I can't say that my drawing skills were ever perfect. And they get better all the time because this is the thing. When you paint, you're going to use drawing skills. But when you're drawing, you are not developing your painting skills. They are 2 different skills. So if you want to paint, then paint. If you want to draw, draw. But just know when you're painting, You're going to have to use your drawing skills a lot because you know what? Those pencil lines get covered up and you can't see them anymore, and it's so easy to mess things up. And for those of you who watch my tutorials, you know that even when I do use a line drawing, sometimes I get my eyes wonky, they're in the wrong place, I'll get a dog's muzzle wonky, not straight, and then that's when I rely on fixing my watercolors. And you guys have seen me fix so many of my watercolors because I get something wonky because I wasn't paying attention to my drawing skills. So yes, drawing skills are important, especially if you're trying to paint realistically, but I really think that if you want to paint, you should paint and use a tracing in order to get an accurate depiction of your subject and then paint. So I do advocate strongly for beginners to trace because I can't tell you how many times I've had beginners post on my Facebook group where they can post their paintings on my Facebook group and get feedback. And it's the wonky drawing that really makes their painting kind of look really amateur. And if they would have just traced and gotten over that mind hump of feeling like it's really not art if you had to trace it, then their artwork would have looked so much better. And especially when you're painting animals or portraits like a lot of the people who follow me, then your animal or your portrait's going to look super wonky if you don't trace and you're an amateur and you don't have drawing skills and you don't have painting skills. You're just setting yourself up for failure. So just trace and move on. And as your painting unfolds, you will see you will need to rely on your drawing skills still. Misconception number 3. If you're a good artist, you can make these effects like beautiful light, no matter what your reference. This is actually not one I heard a pro say, but I recently had someone comment on this bunny painting and she was like, I want to paint cats with this beautiful light. I took from that what she meant was no matter what her reference photo looks like, she thinks that if she has the skills, she'll be able to reproduce this light. And I guess if you paint a lot of light-filled paintings for years and years and you really get to understand it, you could do that. But really what you have to do to set yourself up for success is to start with a good reference photo. And so if you start with a good reference photo, you're setting yourself up for success. And I started with a beautifully lit reference photo to have a good place to jump off from to create a beautiful painting. And I often tell people who commission me, I tell them I can only paint as beautifully as your picture. So if your picture is blurry or dark or it was taken with a flash, it's almost impossible to make up beautiful light or make up for those loss of details. You've got to start with a good reference. Super professional artists who do portraits, for example, they take their own photographs often because they know that if they don't start with a good reference photo, their painting is not going to look good. So it's so important to start with a good reference and teach yourself how to get beautiful reference material so that you can paint beautiful paintings. So I would say that's even more important. Learn about photography and how to get a beautiful reference and learn all those skills even before you learn to draw. I think that's more important, is to have a good eye to figure out what is and is not a good reference photo. And it is definitely beyond the scope of this video, but I will link a video here where I talk more in depth about what makes a good reference photo. So I will link that here. And when you click on that, it will queue it up for you to watch later. It won't take you out of this video. All right. So the next misconception, this is one of my favorite ones because it is a huge misconception. Charles Reed was talking about it. I'm reading Charles Reed's book about how to paint flowers. A lot of professionals talk about don't overwork your painting. That is the last thing you want to do. And my argument is that if you're a beginner, especially, you need to keep working on your painting because the much more common mistake beginners especially make, or those who aren't experienced in painting, is that they get their painting to the ugly stage and then they panic, including me. I panicked on this painting of the bunny because paintings go through ugly stages and it's scary. And if you're an amateur or a beginner, you don't trust your skills yet. You don't trust the process. And so you think you've lost control and you stop before you give the painting a chance. But if you have learned your design skills really well and you're working from a good reference that's beautiful, you've got to trust that reference, trust your design skills, and just work the process and keep going, because I would say 7 or 8 times out of 10, you can turn a painting in the ugly stage into a beautiful painting. And again, almost every painting that I do goes through an ugly stage, and that's very common across even all mediums for paintings to go through the ugly stage. In fact, I was just watching an oil painter yesterday, and he was talking about the ugly stage for his oil painting.
It's very sloppy. There's like the ugly painting stage everyone talks about.
So it doesn't just happen to us watercolorists. It happens to a lot of artists. So just keep working and give your painting the time it needs. Make sure you put in that jewelry. I do have a whole video about what jewelry is, what you put in at the very end of the painting process to really make your painting have a wow factor. I'll link that here. But it's so important to work your painting to the end. And if you end up with an overworked painting, at least you tried. But if you don't work through that ugly stage, then you'll never know if that painting had reached its full potential. And yes, sometimes paintings do get overworked, but more often, I think, especially with beginners, paintings are underworked and they're not taken to their full potential. Misconception number 5, don't soften and rework. Okay, so I was watching a amazing artist, and I will put her name here. I forget. I love her work, and I love watching her videos, and I learned so much from her. So I'm not trying to say that I know more than her or she knows more than me. It's just that some of the advice that she's given doesn't work for me. And that is, once you paint a mark, just leave it. Don't soften it. Don't rework it. Just leave it alone and move on. And I would say, especially after I've watched quite a few professional oil painters, especially, they talk about how you've got to just put something down and then look and see how you like it. And then adjust your painting from there. And then just keep adding new marks, adding new fixes until you get a painting where you want it to go. And so it does take a lot of softening and reworking. At least in my work, I put a mark down, and very often I'll use scrubbers to soften edges, to blur edges. If you watched my recent ornament experimental painting, I did a lot of lifting to create light on light edges on the ornament that I think just made it so magical. Ellen Crimini Trent just had a beautiful tutorial that she redid. She actually has done this tutorial twice because it's awesome, where she paints these poinsettias, lets them dry and set up, and then she scrubs them to make them dreamy. And it's a beautiful effect. So I would say definitely soften and rework if that's part of your style. And very recently, I was reading in Mary White's book. Mary White is amazing. And it made me so happy to see that that is a huge part of her process, which is using scrubbers to soften her edges. And that just made me feel so vindicated, because I'm like, well, am I doing it wrong? I always second guess myself. I do second guess myself all the time. And when I hear artists say something that goes directly against what I found works so well for me, it makes me question my process. And I'm like, well, imposter syndrome. Well, maybe I just don't, maybe I'm just not evolved enough as a painter. But you can't get much more evolved to me than Mary White. And if she softens with a scrubber, then I can't. So that just made me feel good. And so if you like to soften your edges and rework edges with a scrubber, then have at it. There's nothing wrong with it. If it works with your style, do it. And I certainly do a lot of scrubbing and softening and lifting. So that's just part of my process. But for some artists, it's not, and that's just fine. All right, so misconception number 6, our final one. And this is from the book I'm reading by Charles Reed about how to paint flowers. And before I get to this final misconception, let me make another observation. As I read this book by Charles Reed that is about painting flowers, I'm learning so much in general about how to paint just in general. And so that is how I design my tutorials. So even if this painting is about a bunny or a cat or whatever, The way that I design my tutorials is that I talk a lot about the why, not just the how, and also a lot about design and how to make a painting look good. So when you watch my tutorials, you're going to learn how to paint. You're going to learn how to paint whatever you want. So even if you watch this new tutorial that I will be doing in my $13 highly edited tier once I get it edited, which as of this recording, it's not edited, but you will learn so much just about how to paint in general, and not even just with watercolor, because I talk a lot about design and how to use colors. For example, I put a lot of green in this bunny to vibrate with those red ears, to make those red ears look like they're even more glowing than they really are. So I talk a lot about those kind of things to make your painting more powerful. So anyway, that applies to what I learned from Charles Reed, and it kind of took my breath away a little bit when Charles Reed said in his book, once you get something down, don't rework it. And also he said, don't go back over areas and redarken them. And I was like, well, I do that all the time. And I'm sorry, Charles Reed, but I've got to redarken my darks. I got to get my darks dark. For a lot of my paintings, I do have to go back in and redarken and make things even punchier. And if I would not have done this in this painting, as those of you who watch this from start to finish and see how I finish this, if I don't get my darks dark enough, it does not create the effect I want. At least in this particular painting, I would say, especially to get this glowing look, I had to get those darks dark to make this bunny really glow. So darks were not a crutch for me in this painting. They were an absolute necessity. And I did have to go back over my darks 1 or 2 times, and I often do, like in my eyes and the eyeliner, to really make my eyes pop. I've got to go back in and paint over my darks. So sorry, Charles Reed, but that advice doesn't work for a lot of my painting style. So there you have it. Love you, Charles Reed, though. Rest in peace. And I highly recommend his books. I will link his flower book in the description. It's on Kindle for only $10. So you can really get it for a low cost as well. I've got it on my Kindle. But anyway, I hope that this was all useful. I'd love for you to join my Patreon. And if you want to paint this particular bunny, it will be in the highly edited $13 tier. And I also have a new thing on my Patreon where it's easier to see what tutorials I do have. So even if you're not a paying member, you can join my Patreon for free and follow me. And I put out a lot of free updates. And also you can look through my collections to see if there's anything you want to see and what tier it's at. So on my Patreon page at patreon.com/RachelStudio, there is a little tab called Collections, and you can click in there and see all the different tutorials I have, all the different subjects, and I've also organized them by tier level. So I hope that's helpful for you to kind of look around and see what tier might be of interest to you. And I hope you'll come poke around and also join my Facebook group, which is free, and you can upload your photos and we will give you advice if you ask for it. And you can also share your advice with people who ask for it or just ask general art questions. And it's a great community and we're all learning together and it's really fun. So I'd love for you to join that free group as well. And be sure to subscribe to learn not just the how, but the why of watercolor. And until next time, go watercolor your world. Bye, everybody.